They came at dawn. Not soldiers, not thieves, but something far more insidious: the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. Meredith Thorne, president, Empress of Beige, watched from her pristine curb as heavy machinery, summoned by her decree, tore into my family's driveway. For aesthetic inconsistency, a $10,000 violation. She didn't know my name, Arthur Finch, meant nothing to her. She didn't know Arthur Finch owned every grain of sand, every ounce of cement, in every concrete plant for 50 miles. My legacy wasn't just in property, it was in the very foundations of this town. And she was about to pour hers with it. The guttural roar of the excavator was an affront, a declaration of war on a Tuesday morning. My wife, Sarah, stood beside me at the window, her hand gripping mine, her knuckles white. Our 2 children, still asleep upstairs, would wake to a scene of inexplicable destruction, their sense of home fractured by the jagged edges of broken concrete. Aesthetic inconsistency. The violation notice had declared, slipped into our mailbox like a coward's threat. The official HOA letterhead, crisp and self-important, detailed how the subtle, natural aging of our 20-year-old driveway, a few hairline cracks near the culvert, a patch here or there that had darkened slightly more than its surroundings, somehow violated the sacred visual harmony of Harmony Creek. It was, in Meredith Thorne's meticulously curated world, an act of rebellion. I'd seen her operate, of course. A woman whose entire existence seemed to be a crusade against individuality, whose power was derived from the monotonous enforcement of arbitrary rules. Her reign was built on beige paint, uniform lawn heights, and the quivering fear of noncompliance. But this was different. This wasn't a passive-aggressive note about a misplaced recycling bin. This was destruction. This was personal. The excavator's bucket bit into the concrete, the material I understood better than my own blood type, and a cold clarity settled over me. Meredith Thorne, in her boundless arrogance, had just signed her own demolition order. She thought she was merely asserting her dominion over a patch of suburban land. She had no concept of the machinery she had set in motion, not the yellow behemoth currently pulverizing my property, but the invisible, far more powerful machinery of Finch Consolidated Concrete. My mind, usually occupied with aggregate sourcing, tensile strength calculations, and logistical supply chains, shifted gears. The outrage was a cold burn, fueling a methodical thought process. Phase 1. Assess the enemy's overreach. Phase 2. Identify vulnerabilities. Phase 3. Deploy assets for maximum ironic impact. Sarah finally spoke, her voice tight. Arthur, what are we going to do? I looked at the ruin that was once our driveway, the place where my daughter took her first tricycle ride, where my son learned to shoot hoops. I said, my gaze shifting towards Meredith Thorne's perfectly manicured lawn, her overly large new construction McMansion, that was itself an aesthetic crime in its own right. Are going to teach Mrs. Thorne about the true cost of materials and the foundational principles of consequence. The air already smelled of pulverized stone and diesel fumes, the scent of industry. My industry. She had brought the tools of deconstruction. I would bring the tools of irreversible construction. The irony was so rich, it was practically structural. Meredith Thorne's ascent to the Harmony Creek HOA presidency had been a masterclass in petty tyranny, a slow, suffocating creep of beige authoritarianism. It began, as these things often do, with the seemingly innocuous, a friendly reminder about lawn edging, perhaps. Then, the newsletters started, thicker each month, filled with new bylaws, amendments to existing bylaws, and interpretations of bylaws so convoluted they read like absurdist poetry. The color palette for exterior paint was narrowed from a modest 20 shades of off-white to a severe 3, all indistinguishable to the untrained eye. Mailboxes had to be a specific model, purchased from a specific supplier, undoubtedly a cousin of someone on the board. The war on garden gnomes was particularly vicious and swift. My neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, who had a collection of cheerful, if slightly chipped gnomes inherited from his late wife, was fined repeatedly until his tiny ceramic guardians vanished, presumably into an HOA-approved oubliette. I'd tried reason initially, attended a few HOA meetings held in the sterile community clubhouse that smelled faintly of chlorine and simmering resentment. I'd pointed out the vagueness of certain rules, the potential for subjective enforcement. Meredith, flanked by her two loyal, stony-faced board members, Brenda and Gary, the Tweedledum and Tweedledee of suburban oppression, would listen with a patient, condescending smile, then quote chapter and verse of the Harmony Creek covenants, conditions, restrictions, as if it were scripture handed down from on high. "Mr. Finch," she'd said on one occasion, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "we all agree to these standards when we choose to live in a community dedicated to maintaining property values and, well, harmony." The word harmony in her mouth sounded like a threat. My own file with the HOA, I later discovered through a grudgingly fulfilled public records request, after Ms. Albright got involved, but that's later, was already thick. A warning for grass exceeding the mandated 3 inches by 1/4 of an inch during a particularly rainy June. A notice for leaving our trash receptacles visible from the street for 2 hours past the approved post-pickup window. A sternly worded letter about a basketball hoop that, while permitted, was deemed aesthetically disruptive due to its excessive backboard vibrancy. Each infraction was a minor prick, an irritation, but the driveway, that was an escalation beyond measure. Sarah had been worried for weeks, ever since the first courtesy notice about the driveway's incipient decline arrived. "Just patch it, Arthur," she'd urged. It's not worth fighting her over this. But it wasn't just about the concrete. It was about the principle. It was about drawing a line. My research into the HOA covenants had been thorough. I knew the rules, the loopholes, the appeal processes. I also knew Meredith Thorne often bypassed them, ruling by decree, confident that most residents would rather pay a fine than endure the Kafkaesque nightmare of challenging her. Her power base was fear and apathy. The silent majority in Harmony Creek grumbled in private but cowered in public. They painted their houses the approved shade of taupe, hid their gnomes, and measured their grass with religious fervor. The thought had crossed my mind, even before the demolition, that if one were to, say, disrupt the supply of that specific shade of taupe, but no, that was thinking too small. Meredith had now provided a far grander canvas for a lesson in supply and demand. As the excavators continued their work, a grim satisfaction began to displace the initial shock. She had chosen the weapon, destruction of property. She had chosen the battleground, my home. She simply hadn't realized she was bringing a spade to a concrete war, and I owned the quarry, the kilns, and the entire damned fleet of mixers. The morning after the demolition was stark. Sunrise painted the sky in hues of innocent pink and orange, a cruel contrast to the gaping wound in our front yard. The air was still, the suburban quiet amplifying the visual violence. Jagged chunks of concrete lay like fallen tombstones, rebar exposed like severed nerves. My son, Leo, just 8, stared at it, his lower lip trembling. "Why did they break our road, Daddy?" My daughter, Chloe, older at 12, was angrier. "That's illegal. Can't we call the police?" Sarah stood beside me, her arm around Leo. Her earlier quiet fury had solidified into a steely resolve that mirrored my own. "Arthur," she said, her voice low and steady, "whatever you need to do, do it." That was all the sanction I required. The family, my anchor, my justification. The first step was documentation. I took hundreds of photos, videos, from every conceivable angle. Close-ups of the destruction, wide shots showing the context, the casual brutality of it. I noted the name of the demolition company on the side of the idled excavator, still parked accusingly on the street. They'd be back, presumably, to haul away the debris, or so they thought. Then, the call. I retreated to my study, a room lined with geological survey maps and material science textbooks, my sanctuary. I dialed Sal Moretti, manager of Finch Consolidated's largest local plant, a man who had worked for my father before me, A man whose loyalty was as solid as the Morty concrete mix he perfected. Sal, I said. No preamble. Situation critical at my residence. Harmony Creek, HOA. Executive action. My driveway. Gone. A moment of silence. Then Sal's gravelly voice. The dragon lady, Thorne? She finally lost her damn mind? Completely, I confirmed. Operation Bedrock is a go. Initiate Phase 1. Supply chain lockdown for Harmony Creek. All deliveries, all contractors, all projects within the Harmony Creek HOA jurisdiction are immediately on hold. Cite unforeseen regional aggregate shortages. Understood? Sal chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Understood, Arthur. Consider Harmony Creek a concrete desert. Anything for you specifically? Negative on my property for now, Sal. We're in a tactical pause. But I need you to identify the contractor Meredith Thorne is using for her new pool installation. She's putting one in, isn't she? Sal, who had an uncanny network of information through drivers and site foremen, grunted. Heard whispers. Big one. Olympic aspirations, probably. I'll get you the name of the poor bastards pouring it within the hour. Good. And Sal, I added, prepare Mixer Unit 7, the Retribution Special, as you call it. Load it with our densest, fastest setting, non-negotiable foundation mix. No additives for leisurely curing. We want something permanent. Sal's chuckle was richer this time. Consider it done, boss. She wants to play with foundations. We'll give her a foundation she'll never forget. The first taste of control was potent. The gears were turning, my gears, now meshing with the broader machinery of commerce and consequence. Meredith Thorne had flexed her petty power. She was about to discover what real leverage felt like. The cost of the demolition, the fines, the sheer audacity, all of it would be repaid, with interest, compounded daily, in solid, unyielding concrete. Operation Trojan Mixer began with Sal's call an hour later. Got 'em, Arthur. Paradise Pools, Inc. Small outfit, probably gave Thorne a lowball bid she couldn't resist. They're scheduled to pour the footings and shell for her monstrosity tomorrow morning. First truck, 8 a.m. sharp. Paradise Pools, Inc. I almost smiled. The irony was self-generating at this point. Excellent, Sal. Now, here's Phase 2. Paradise Pools sources their concrete from us, don't they? Exclusively, boss. We're their sole supplier, loyalty discount. Then they won't question a change in dispatcher timing if it comes directly from your office, Sal. That 8 a.m. truck for Meredith Thorne's property on Lilac Lane? It's going to experience a slight, unavoidable diversion. You will contact Paradise Pools an hour before. A mechanical issue with their assigned truck, perhaps. Assure them a replacement is on its way, a premier vehicle, even to ensure their project stays on schedule. Mixer Unit 7. Sal was already ahead of me. And the original crew for that pour? They won't know the difference in the mix until it's too late. It'll look like any other high-grade foundation concrete going in. Precisely, I said. They pour. They smooth. They leave. By the time anyone realizes what's in that foundation, it'll be a monolithic block, harder than regret. My inner monologue was a checklist, a tactical brief. Asset: Finch Consolidated Concrete. Target: Meredith Thorne's new pool, symbol of her aspirational tyranny. Method: supply chain manipulation, precision delivery of a custom, irreversible payload. Objective: demonstrate consequence on a grand, unignorable scale. She wanted aesthetic consistency? I was about to provide a profoundly consistent and deeply problematic foundation for her backyard oasis. The beauty of owning the supply chain was its subtlety. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, just quiet phone calls, altered shipping manifests, the silent, inexorable movement of heavy vehicles directed by my will. Meredith Thorne thought she was wielding power by destroying a driveway. I was wielding power by controlling the very substance of construction for an entire region. Her contractors, Paradise Pools, were unwitting pawns. Their reliance on Finch Consolidated made them vulnerable, instruments of my design. I felt a pang of something akin to pity for them, but it was fleeting. They were collateral, unfortunate but necessary. My primary concern was the message to Thorne. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. This was about the sanctity of property, the abuse of authority, and the elegant, brutal poetry of turning an enemy's own ambitions against them. Sal, a man of few words but immense capability, would orchestrate the logistics with the precision of a seasoned quartermaster. He knew the routes, the crews, the subtle arts of making a 60,000-pound truck full of liquid stone appear exactly where it was most inconveniently, yet perfectly placed. "She wanted a statement piece in her backyard, Arthur," Sal had rumbled before hanging up. "We're going to give her one that makes a statement for the geological ages." The quiet hum of my home office, usually a comfort, now felt like the command center of a silent suburban war. The pieces were moving. The trap was set. Tomorrow, Meredith Thorne would learn that some foundations are built to last, and some are built to be monuments to spectacular misjudgment. The dawn of the poor was gray, overcast, fitting for the day's business. I had arranged to be at Mr. Henderson's house, the former gnome aficionado, whose property backed onto Meredith Thorne's. He was surprisingly eager to assist, a mischievous glint in his 80-year-old eyes when I'd subtly explained that Mrs. Thorne might be experiencing some unforeseen landscaping complications. He offered me coffee and a vantage point from his sunroom window. At precisely 7:55 a.m., Mixer Unit 7, freshly washed, its drum rotating with slow, ponderous menace, rumbled down Lilac Lane. It was one of our newer models, ironically painted a cheerful sky blue, a stark contrast to the grim purpose of its cargo. Sal had outdone himself. The Paradise Pools crew, two young men looking eager to get the job done, waved it into position alongside the excavated pit that was to be Meredith's luxurious in-ground pool. I watched, sipping Mr. Henderson's surprisingly strong coffee, as they expertly maneuvered the chute. There was no hesitation, no suspicion. Why would there be? It was a concrete truck, delivering concrete. The mundane becoming the instrument of the extraordinary. The pour began. A thick gray slurry, indistinguishable at first glance from any standard mix, flowed into the carefully constructed rebar cage that formed the skeleton of the pool. It filled the deep end first, then the shallower sections, the crew working efficiently, spreading it, coaxing it into every crevice of the forms. It was a hypnotic sight, this relentless, viscous tide. Every cubic yard of that concrete was a testament to Sal's craft and my resolve. This wasn't just any mix. This was a custom blend, designed for rapid, uncompromising solidification, with a compressive strength that would make bridge engineers weep with joy. Removing it would be less a demolition job and more a quarrying operation. Mr. WWW. Henderson chuckled beside me. "She always wanted the best, that one. Looks like she's finally getting it." His dry wit was an unexpected balm. The crew worked for nearly 2 hours. The vast, amoebic shape of the pool was now a solid gray mass, smooth and featureless. They finished, cleaned their tools, exchanged a few words, then climbed back into their pickup truck and drove away, oblivious. Mixer Unit 7, its drum now empty, rumbled off a few minutes later, its mission accomplished. Silence descended on Lilac Lane, broken only by the chirping of birds, indifferent to the monumental act of sabotage that had just occurred. I stayed at Mr. Henderson's window for another hour, watching. Nothing happened. The concrete just sat there, a silent, gray testament. It was curing, hardening, becoming one with the earth, an immovable object placed directly in the path of Meredith Thorne's irresistible ego. The sheer audacity of it, even to me, was breathtaking. To fill a woman's future swimming pool with a substance designed for dam construction, all because she'd overstepped on a driveway. It was disproportionate. It was excessive. It was perfect. The symbolism was too potent to ignore. Her monument to leisure, her status symbol, was now a sarcophagus of solid rock. A permanent, unyielding reminder that actions have consequences, sometimes delivered by the cubic yard. The beauty of it was its passivity. I hadn't argued or threatened. I had simply provided Meredith Thorne. According to Mr. Henderson's gleeful later report, he'd taken to watching her house with the intensity of a seasoned spy. Returned home around 3 p.m., doubtless from a day of important HOA business, perhaps selecting a new, even more restrictive shade of beige for the community sign. Her car, a pristine white SUV that probably violated some unwritten rule about excessive vehicular gloss, pulled into her driveway. She emerged, sunglasses perched on her head, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. It was, Mr. Henderson recounted, a cinematic moment. She strolled into her backyard, perhaps anticipating a visual update on her aquatic paradise. Her steps faltered. The smirk vanished. Her sunglasses clattered to the patio. Mr. Henderson described her initial reaction as one of profound, uncomprehending stillness. She stared at the vast, gray, unyielding expanse that had, only that morning, been a promising hole in the ground. Then came the first sound, a sort of strangled gasp. She approached the edge of the now solidified mass, tentatively touched it with the toe of her expensive-looking shoe. She prodded it. It did not yield. The confusion on her face, visible even from Mr. Henderson's vantage point, apparently morphed into dawning horror, then into a shade of crimson that, ironically, would have been flagged for aesthetic non-compliance in Harmony Creek. Her phone was out. Frantic calls were made. Her voice, initially sharp and commanding, allegedly rose in pitch and volume until it was practically a shriek, echoing across the manicured lawns of Lilac Lane. The Paradise Pools contractor, a Mr. Bill Baxter, was the first to arrive, his pickup truck skidding to a halt. His bewilderment was, by all accounts, total. He poked the concrete. He scratched his head. He was seen making his own frantic calls. Next, a few of Meredith's HOA board sycophants arrived. Brenda and Gary, summoned like minions. They too stared, mouths agape. The scene, as relayed by Mr. Henderson with theatrical flair, was one of escalating panic and disbelief. Meredith was reportedly gesticulating wildly, her voice now a sustained bellow of outrage. The words sabotage, lawsuit, and ruined were apparently frequent. The crowning moment came when Mr. Baxter, after a heated exchange with Meredith, tried to call his supplier, Finch Consolidated Concrete, Sal Moretti's direct line. Sal, bless his stoic heart, apparently informed Mr. Baxter with profound regret that yes, there had been a most unfortunate mix-up with a new dispatcher, a terrible, terrible error, and that the premier Rapid Set Industrial Foundation mix was indeed delivered instead of the standard pool-grade concrete. So sorry. And no, there was no way to remove it short of explosives and a mining crew. Furthermore, due to an unforeseen and catastrophic regional aggregate shortage, a complete fabrication, of course, Finch Consolidated would be unable to supply any further concrete to Harmony Creek, or indeed Paradise Pools, for the foreseeable future. The ripple effect began. Meredith Thorne's pool was not just filled, it was entombed. And now, no one in Harmony Creek could get concrete for their HOA-approved patios, driveway repairs, or fountain installations. Her kingdom of beige was facing a foundational crisis. The news of the great concrete catastrophe of Lilac Lane, as Mr. Henderson dubbed it, started to spread. Her power, built on the illusion of unassailable control, was beginning to crack, quite literally, around a pool-shaped rock. The legal storm Meredith Thorne promised arrived not as a tempest, but as a sputtering, misdirected drizzle. Her first salvo was a cease-and-desist letter, hand-delivered by a nervous-looking courier, accusing me, Arthur Finch, of malicious interference with contractual obligations and wanton destruction of private property. The irony was so thick, I could have paved a small road with it. It demanded immediate payment for the remediation of her pool, a geological impossibility, and the full replacement cost of my own demolished driveway, which she now hilariously claimed was a gesture of community improvement, regrettably misunderstood. I took the letter, along with my meticulously compiled dossier of the HOA's transgressions and the illegal demolition of my property, to Ms. Evelyn Albright, Esquire, Albright Associates was a boutique firm known for its aggressive litigation and a delightful disdain for bureaucratic overreach. Ms. Albright, a woman whose smile could freeze assets, listened to my account, reviewed my evidence, and examined the photographs of Meredith's concrete-filled pool with an expression that was initially one of professional detachment, then slowly morphed into something resembling delighted disbelief. "Finch," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the photo of the entombed pool, "you are either a suburban Machiavelli or the luckiest victim of circumstance I've ever encountered. Let's lean towards Machiavelli, Miss Albright. It saves time." Her smile widened. "Indeed, Mrs. Thorne's claims are ambitious and entirely without merit, given the documented prior actions of the HOA regarding your property. The demolition of your driveway was a clear violation of Sections 7.3 and 9.1 of the Harmony Creek Covenants, which require a 30-day notice and an opportunity for homeowner remediation, neither of which you received." She then turned her attention to the pool. "As for Mrs. Thorne's pool, her contract was with Paradise Pools, Inc., not you. Any issue regarding the specific grade of concrete delivered is between her and her contractor. And if Paradise Pools sourced their material from, say, a company that experienced an unfortunate internal error, and is also, coincidentally, owned by you, well, that's just a delightful confluence of market forces, isn't it?" Our countersuit was a thing of beauty. It detailed the HOA's campaign of harassment, the illegal demolition, the emotional distress, the property damage. It named Meredith Thorne personally, citing provisions in the HOA bylaws for holding board members liable for actions taken in bad faith or gross negligence. We sought full restitution for my driveway, punitive damages, legal fees, and an injunction against any further retaliatory actions by the HOA. The effect on Meredith was immediate. Her bluster deflated. The threats of lawsuits against me evaporated. Suddenly, she was on the defensive, facing not just financial ruin but the public dismantling of her carefully constructed authority. Other neighbors, emboldened by my stand and Miss Albright's reputation, began to emerge from the woodwork. Mr. Henderson, with Miss Albright's guidance, prepared a small claims action for the wrongful confiscation and presumed destruction of his garden gnome collection, valuing each gnome at an inflated, sentimental, and artisanal price. Mrs. Rodriguez, from down the street, produced records of exorbitant fines for non-conforming wind chimes. The legal chess game was afoot, and Meredith Thorne, who fancied herself a queen, was rapidly finding herself in checkmate, her pieces scattered, her defenses crumbling. The concrete in her backyard was a silent gray monument to her folly, but the legal documents piling up on her doorstep were the chisels slowly carving away her power. The cracks in Meredith Thorne's empire of beige began to spread with alarming speed, not just legally, but socially and logistically throughout Harmony Creek. The concrete kerfuffle, as a snarky local blogger dubbed it after an anonymous tip, likely from a delighted Sal Moretti, became the talk of the town, then the county. The narrative was irresistible. Overreaching HOA president gets a taste of her own medicine, with a uniquely permanent, cement-based twist. My self-imposed concrete embargo on Harmony Creek had immediate and widespread consequences. Several residents had HOA-approved projects underway, a new retaining wall here, a patio extension there. Suddenly, their contractors couldn't get so much as a bag of ready mix. Calls to Finch Consolidated were met with polite, regretful explanations of unforeseen supply chain disruptions affecting your specific geographic area. The contractors, frustrated and losing money, complained to the HOA. The residents, their dream patios on indefinite hold, complained even louder. Meredith, already reeling from our countersuit, found herself besieged by a new wave of discontent from the very people she purported to rule. Her authority, once absolute, was visibly eroding. At the next HOA board meeting, a hastily called emergency session, the atmosphere was reportedly less Harmony Creek and more French Revolution, Suburban Edition. Brenda and Gary, her erstwhile loyal lieutenants, were looking pale and evasive. Other board members previously silent, began to ask pointed questions about legal exposures and the sudden, inexplicable concrete drought. Meredith's attempts to rally support, to paint herself as the victim of a malicious conspiracy orchestrated by me, fell flat. Too many people had their own stories of her petty tyrannies. The legend of the entombed pool had taken on a life of its own, a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood barbecues, those that didn't require new concrete patios anyway. The silent majority, the residents who had long chafed under Meredith's oppressive rule but feared retribution, began to find their voices. A petition started circulating, initially online, then door to door, calling for Meredith Thorne's immediate resignation and a full audit of the HOA's finances and enforcement practices. Mr. Henderson, now a local folk hero, was one of its most enthusiastic proponents, his gnome-related grievances having found a much larger, more receptive audience. Even the landscaping company that Meredith had used for years, the one whose crew had so eagerly demolished my driveway, began to distance themselves. They issued a carefully worded statement about operating under direct instruction from the HOA board and expressed regret for any distress caused to homeowners. Translation: we were just following orders, and please don't sue us too. The beauty of the situation was its organic unraveling. My initial, decisive action, the concrete redirection, had been the catalyst, but the subsequent collapse of Meredith's regime was fueled by years of her own accumulated bad will. She had sown the wind with arbitrary rules and vindictive enforcement. Now she was reaping a whirlwind of public scorn and logistical chaos. The foundations of her power, unlike the one in her backyard, proved to be remarkably unstable. The emergency HOA meeting, held a week later in the community clubhouse, was less a meeting and more a public trial. The room, usually sparsely attended by a few dedicated gadflies and Meredith's core supporters, was packed. Standing room only. The air crackled with anticipation and a palpable sense of righteous anger. Meredith Thorne sat at the head table, flanked by a visibly uncomfortable Brenda and a sweating Gary. Her usual imperious demeanor was gone, replaced by a tight, brittle composure that threatened to shatter at any moment. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. I attended, of course, with Sarah by my side. Ms. Albright sat next to me, a slim briefcase on her lap, an expression of calm, predatory readiness on her face. We were not there to gloat, merely to observe the inevitable. The meeting began with Meredith attempting to control the narrative, offering a rambling, defensive account of recent unfortunate events and misunderstandings. She spoke of upholding community standards, of protecting property values. Her voice, usually so confident and cutting, quavered slightly. Then Miss Albright rose. She didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. In a calm, precise voice, she laid out the legal case against the HOA and Meredith Thorne personally. She detailed the illegal demolition of my driveway, citing chapter and verse of the violated bylaws. She presented affidavits from other residents, a litany of abuses of power, selective enforcement, and financial irregularities. She mentioned the countersuit, the potential for personal liability for board members acting in bad faith. With each sentence, another chip fell from Meredith's crumbling facade. Then the floor was open to residents. It was a dam bursting. One after another, people stood up, voices trembling with years of suppressed frustration. Mr. Board Henderson, with surprising eloquence, recounted the saga of his persecuted gnomes and the tyranny of arbitrary aestheticism. Mrs. Rodriguez detailed the fines for her wind chimes, which apparently disturbed Meredith's feng shui sensibilities, from 3 houses away. A young couple spoke of being forced to repaint their front door 3 times because Meredith kept changing her mind about the approved shade of muted cranberry. The stories poured out, a torrent of grievances. Meredith sat, hen-faced, as her reign was publicly dissected. Brenda and Gary seemed to shrink in their chairs, desperately trying to become invisible. The climax came when a motion of no confidence in Meredith Thorne as HOA president was proposed by a previously timid board member. The call for a vote was immediate. Hands shot up across the room, a forest of dissent. It was overwhelming. A landslide. Meredith Thorne, Empress of Beige, was deposed. Her face, when the result was announced, was a mask of disbelief and fury, quickly dissolving into a sort of stunned emptiness. There were no cheers, just a profound, collective sigh of relief. The public humiliation was complete. Her power, built on intimidation and the minutiae of bylaws, had been undone by the collective will of a community she had underestimated, and by one man who understood the strategic application of Portland cement. As Sarah and I walked out into the cool evening air, Ms. Albright beside us, there was a sense of quiet triumph. Justice, like concrete, could be slow to set, but once it did, it was remarkably firm. Meredith's reign had ended not with a bang or even a whimper, but with the rustle of a no-confidence motion and the quiet, collective turning of a page. The aftermath was a slow return to something resembling suburban normalcy, albeit a normalcy viewed through a new lens of homeowner empowerment. The HOA, under a hastily assembled interim board, which pointedly did not include Brenda or Gary, who both resigned in disgrace shortly after Meredith's ouster, moved quickly to settle our lawsuit. The terms were favorable: full payment for the complete replacement of our driveway, all legal fees covered, and a public apology issued in the next HOA newsletter. Meredith Thorne, stripped of her power and facing potential personal financial ruin from other, smaller lawsuits that were now bubbling up, put her house on the market within a month. The magnificent, unremovable concrete block in her backyard, now a local legend, proved to be something of a deterrent to potential buyers. Last I heard, she sold it at a significant loss to a rather eccentric sculptor who claimed to see potential in the monolithic form. I like to think he's planning a piece titled Ode to Overreach. I supervised the pouring of our new driveway myself. Naturally, I used Finch Consolidated Concrete, our premium M50 Heritage blend, reinforced with microfibers, stained a subtle, elegant charcoal gray that was, I noted with a private smile, not on any approved HOA color chart, past or present. Sal came by to oversee the pour, a rare grin on his face. "Looks good, Arthur," he said, kicking a stray pebble off the forms. "Solid. Built to last." "Like good decisions, Sal," I replied. "And bad ones, in their own way." The children were thrilled to have their road back, bigger and better than before. Leo immediately set up his basketball hoop. Chloe practiced her roller skating. Sarah planted new flowers along the border, vibrant colors that would have sent Meredith into paroxysms of bylaw-quoting rage. Harmony Creek began to breathe again. The interim HOA board, chastened and eager to restore faith, initiated a full review of the covenants, soliciting actual input from residents. The reign of beige was officially over. Sometimes I would stand on my new driveway in the quiet of the evening, looking out at the neighborhood. It was a reminder that even in the most seemingly placid environments, battles for dignity and fairness could erupt. It was a reminder that power, unchecked, inevitably corrupts, whether in the halls of government or the cul-de-sacs of suburbia. And it was a reminder that sometimes the most effective response to an outrageous act of aggression is not an equally loud retort, but a quiet, calculated, and overwhelmingly decisive countermove, delivered with the precision of a logistician and the unwavering solidity of reinforced concrete. The fight had been intensely personal, fueled by a protective loyalty to my family and a cold, righteous fury at the injustice. But the victory felt larger than just us. It was a small crack in the edifice of petty tyranny everywhere. A new foundation, not just for my driveway, but perhaps for a slightly more reasonable way of coexisting. And as for Meredith Thorne's pool, it remains, I presume, a subterranean monument to her folly, a permanent, unyielding testament to the fact that when you try to bulldoze a man's property, you should always check to see if he owns the concrete plant. You just never know whose foundation you might be pouring.